Hey everyone, Mallory from Humanitec here, and today I'm going to walk you through the minimum viable platform process. I want to show you what this means, what you're about to do, and what you can expect to achieve on the other side. I'm also going to help you find some really cool resources to guide you through this process. When we look at our MVP as a whole, there's a couple key concepts we need to understand before we jump in. The first is platform engineering, and this is the discipline that we are adopting here. It's a discipline for building internal developer platforms that serve the needs of different users in your engineering organization. And in reality, it is a practice, it is a theory, and it is a way of thinking that drives a lot of the way we design things here at Humanitec. What's an internal developer platform? What this is a sum of all of your technical tools that form golden paths. These things enable developer self-service and a very high degree of standardization. What we're trying to achieve here is making people's lives easier. IDPs are a great way to do this, especially when they're inside of this platform engineering philosophy. One of the key things we try to do is treat our platforms like products, and we encourage you to do the same. When you do this, you're taking your platform and making subject to iterations. And this is based on not just the requirements, but also feedback in from your different user groups. When you treat it as a product, your customers, in this case, are your developers, they're the rest of your operations organization, and they're also folks like security, finance, and management. It's important to think of them all inside of this process. The minimum viable platform itself can be defined as a first version of your internal developer platform, your IDP. The idea here is that you're getting something that you can demo to other users. You can show them your vision, you can show them what the future can look like, and encourage them to join you on the journey. At the end of the MVP, we basically want people to say, yep, I'm ready to adopt that. So why would we recommend doing things this way to begin with? And realistically, it is because it is easier to drive impact when you're able to start slow, scale gradually, and address pain points in an effective way. Platform engineering as a practice is really designed to do this. So if we start really looking inside of an organization, the first thing we look at is the pain points. And often for developers inside of their process, we see things like missing self-service. We see cognitive load that is quite high. We see waiting times. Things are slow. On the other side of that pyramid, we see infra and operations teams, sometimes called DevOps, platform engineering, whatever you want to call it. They're faced with the burden of stuff like ticket ops, low standardization, insecure configurations, and things that break, manual review processes that add up. And they often are also responsible when infrastructure costs go completely out of control. When you take those pain points and you really start thinking about the things that lay underneath them, you end up with two key value drivers inside of this space. And the first is automation, and the second is standardization. These two concepts will help resolve a lot of those pain points. And this is the value drivers you need to think about inside of this process. On the right side, our persona here looks like what we call a DevX platform engineer. And these are the folks that represent the developers in the design of the platform. On the left-hand side, we have infrastructure platform engineers, and these are the representatives of our infra and ops teams. Whether or not this is an individual or a team itself, that is really up to you. But what's important is that both aspects of that dev and ops scale are represented inside of how you design your IDP and indeed how you handle your MVP. The really cool part, though, is that when you do this right and you take platform engineering and apply it well, the impact goes beyond just the engineering org, and it goes to the business itself. What we often see is things like time to market goes down. You're able to be competitive a lot quicker inside of your space. Your costs stabilize, if not go down, which is an incredibly valuable thing as infrastructure becomes more and more costly. And one of the coolest things is that we see organizations able to innovate faster. They're able to do more because they have time to actually innovate and invent. And what that does is benefits not just the managers of the engineering org, but obviously the company as a whole. Executives really, really like that. Often you can tie these initiatives in to what your leadership team is trying to achieve. What does this look like when we have a high degree of automation and standardization? Well, it is a high return on investment, just not from only a financial perspective. You also have a time ROI involved here. And I'll show you a little bit about what that looks like. In a lot of modern setups, when we come into them and look at them for the first time, we tend to see a little bit of automation. So what we'll see, for example, is if a developer requests a Redis database, that is actioned through GitHub Actions in Terraform, just as an example. The only automation inside this process, though, is that Redis is created. A human, either myself as a developer or someone on my operations team, has to go through and make sure that configs are adopted to the new requirements, policies are run, they're checked off, secrets are referenced and injected, often manually because of the nature of how that tends to be handled. And this is also repeated across each eligible environment for each workload where that change has had to be made. It's very, very low in the automation side of things. The way we recommend designing this process and following platform engineering philosophy means that this looks quite different. With high automation, that same request for Redis is handled by Humanitec products like Score and the platform orchestrator and runs an entirely automated process. So not only is that Redis created, but all of the configs are adopted accordingly, policies are run and signed off, secrets are referenced, and this is repeated across each environment without a human having to get involved. The really cool thing is that while not everything has to be automated, for every step that you automate in the process, you have an incredibly high return on time. You get a lot back and developers are able to move a lot quicker. We also see something quite interesting on the standardization side of things. When we come into orgs, what I often see is a one-to-one relationship between workloads and dependency configurations. Even if you have things like Terraform modules in place or templates that your teams can use, what we still tend to see is that one-to-one relationship between a configuration for a particular resource and the workload that it's being used. This is one-to-one across all environments. This is one-to-one across all of the workloads. And what you end up having is a massive mess of things to stay on top of and maintain. It becomes very unstable. It becomes insecure. There tends to be a lot of vulnerabilities here when things are manually configured. And in order to make a change, like simply upgrading the version of Postgres, it is a lot of work. Instead, what we recommend and how we end up seeing things at the end of our process is that we have a one-to-many relationship. So it's highly standardized. There is one configuration for Postgres inside of the context of staging or across multiple environments for all of the workloads to which that needs to be applied. One configuration to manage, one configuration to update, multiple workloads impacted without the need to manage them all individually. There's a lot of return on investment in time here as well as money, which is important to focus on. So what does the MVP itself entail? Well, you are now in the first phase of a platform engineering initiative. We've noticed that if we break things down into phases and make them easily digestible and achievable in terms of their outcomes, adoption of a platform engineering mindset as well as a platform as a whole becomes significantly easier. The Minimum Viable Platform, the MVP, is the first program we recommend you do. This is 4 to 8 weeks. It can be done faster. We've seen it done in a lot less time, but we say 4 to 8 because for a lot of teams that do this, you're also doing other stuff. We want to make sure that you're able to do that as well as handle something new. Our outcome here is that we have a demoable first version of our platform running. So at the end of this, we're able to go to people and show them something and get their interest in adopting it down the road. On the business side of things, this is a monthly engagement with Humanitec, and it actually includes package pricing. It's very easy to get started with. It is a very low cost barrier, and we are able to guide you along the whole thing. What we want to do is make sure that you are successful. After the MVP, we have 2 other programs, both of which have the same level of structure to them. The first is production readiness. So this is where we would start doing production grade work and have a first team using the platform every single day at the end of it. This is actually part of a monthly licensing agreement with Humanitec, so it's not packaged, it's part of just licenses, and we tend to do that also in about 8 weeks. After that, we move into full-scale adoption. So we see that as ongoing. There are teams that roll that out across years or months, and what we look at there is annual agreements because that tends to be a much longer scale time period. We'll look at that towards the end of your MVP, but in the meantime, it's important to see that there's a very clear path forward to adoption and that we are here for you along the entire journey. When we look at the MVP itself, we try to break down the outcomes and their success criteria by the personas that we tend to interact with and who are important inside of this process. These are your stakeholders. So our platform teams tend to be the ones that develop technical conviction to go forward with production grade work. And how we make sure we do this is by having that demoable platform integrated with their existing tools. We want to make sure these teams understand the technical capabilities in the context of what they need to achieve and what we can do inside 8 weeks. We want to show that we can reduce ticket ops and manual processes inside of this, as well as show that we can enable standardization through a practice called infrastructure platform engineering. And finally, what's important is we want to be able to demonstrate that we can reduce bottlenecks and improve operational efficiency for these teams. For our application developers, the idea at the end is that they are registering or they're ready to go for onboarding to a production grade version. We've got people excited and they want to use your platform. How we measure against this is that we are going to make sure we can prepare and be ready to drive adoption and usage. We're going to help you build out plans for this and also show you how to do the internal marketing that you need to do to get people excited. We want to also be able to show a measurable improvement in developer experience with this platform. Platform engineering is so much about developer experience that is integral that your design does exactly this. From the security perspective, our security teams inside of our MVPs need to know that what we are building is future-proof. Not just inside the MVP, but beyond. So as part of this, what we try to do is evaluate security and compliance requirements very early on in the process. If you can keep security happy, they tend to be much more likely to want you to go forward with full adoption at the end. What we also want to make sure we do here, just like the other two personas, is show that we can ease the burden on them. We can make their workflow easier because of the standardization and automation that we've put in place. Finally, we've got our executives, we've got our management, whatever that looks like for your organization. But at the end of the day, we want them to believe that the return on investment is justified in a production grade platform. We want them to understand the value of platform engineering, of the IDP you're building, and of having Humanitec at the heart of it. How we do this is showing measurable value. And we'll talk about this inside of the MVP itself, how exactly we do this. And we also need to show the cost of migration. Migration does have a cost to it. However, it is generally a high return on investment. And we want to make sure that we can demonstrate that as part of this process. So what we're going to do in order to achieve these things is work across 3 focus areas. So we call them tracks. We've got our technical track, which is focused on the integration, testing, and evaluation of the components we need to meet our technical requirements inside of MVPs. We have the business track. So this is where we're going to make sure we understand and build a business case on the value and the return on investment of a Humanitec powered platform. And then finally, we have the security track. So this makes sure that organizational security is aligned between the teams that are doing this, as well as security teams themselves, against both what we're doing in the MVP and a production grade version. We also want to make sure that they're involved in approving the further iterations that we'll design inside this process in order to make sure we can get to production grade in a secure way. The way we deliver these is across 4 phases. And again, it is so important to us to break things down into achievable chunks because it makes a lot more sense to do things on a checklist type basis than it does to just fly by the seat of your pants. I promise you, if you follow the phases we've laid out and what we do inside each of them, you're going to have a much easier time getting the buy-in at the end of this and getting a platform for your org. Inside of phase 1, which we call discovery, which is basically where you're sitting right now, we're going to do 3 different things across the tracks. So for our tech track, we're going to choose our first application. In the business track, we're going to measure the baseline of what we have and what our current engineering setup looks like. For security, we're going to start gathering intelligence and start understanding the requirements that we're going to have to meet in order to go to production. The expected duration for this is around 1 week. All of the durations here that you're seeing are flexible. Like I said, 4 to 8 weeks is not uncommon. But when we put 1 week down in here, what we're trying to say is that it is very achievable to do all of these things inside of a finite amount of time, as long as you follow the steps that we put in place. Phase two is our integration phase. So we have our tech track. We're going to integrate the platform orchestrator into our infrastructure, into your infrastructure, whether that be AWS, GCP, Azure, or any of the other providers, and get that base of the platform built. The business side, we're going to build an ROI calculation. This is the first version of this, and we're likely to iterate it further on, but we're going to start early so we can at least have a clear picture of what we're looking at. At this point, we want security to start running assessment on a production grade version. What is it they require in order for this platform to be able to go to production? This takes time, which is why you see it split over 2 phases. In deployment, our goal is to launch the first application. This can be a sample application, or it can be a real life example from your org. It doesn't matter. At the end of the day, what's important though is that it's representative of the context your teams are used to seeing. When you go to demo to them and when you get them to try it hands-on, it needs to be familiar territory. On the business side, we're going to build a business case, and we're going to make sure we understand how to prove the value to our business. From security's perspective, we still want that assessment to keep running. There's probably a lot going on, and that is totally okay. And finally, in our adoption planning phase, our goal is to run developer tests, get this thing in front of them and get them using it. We also need to decide on the business perspective on a rollout strategy. So you'll generally sit with me or one of our other customer success managers and look at your plans for rolling out a platform across your organization. We'll help you come up with a defined roadmap too for what needs to happen technically in that process. The ideal here is also that security says, yes, you're ready to go into production grade work. Here's what you need to do inside of that. And then we can start planning towards that production readiness program process. So I want to walk you very quickly through how we break these things down and go through a project plan. When you work with us to do this MVP, we will build a project plan for you and walk you through it every single week. When you work with us directly, you get a customer success manager who is going to be responsible for the day-to-day orchestration of your project. We'll be checking in with you regularly, and they are also your primary contact. Your CSM is also going to handle the business and security tracks across the MVP. So those folks are incredibly important to connect in to your customer success manager's inbox. You're also going to work with a platform architect, and this person is responsible for technical Q&A, tech sessions. They're going to be your primary technical contact, and they are also responsible for all of the deliverables on the tech track. Each week, we have a key set of interactions that we want you to have with your Humanitec team in order to be successful. So weekly, we have a project management check-in with your CSM. So this is just progress tracking, covering business and security track. You can also cover the tech track in this time. From the architect perspective, we want you to get engaged with office hours. So we generally recommend an hour weekly where your architect can help debug things with you, give you the technical help you need, and go into the deeper questions you might have. Your architect is also going to lead you through learning sessions. So these are enablement sessions that train you on particular pieces of the platform or particular concepts that you need to know along each stage. And finally, something we do offer folks in the white glove package is daily stand-ups and check-ins with your platform architect. This can be very useful, especially if you're trying to achieve things very quickly. So we definitely recommend chatting with your Humanitec team and getting all of these things set up. There are some advice pieces we have for you in terms of finishing your MVP successfully and on time. And 90% of teams do when they follow these do's and don'ts. So there's 3 things I don't want you to do. And the first is don't work on what you think matters. Oops. The second thing is don't slow down and don't lose momentum. And the third thing I don't want you to do is go too fast and overestimate your maturity along this journey. How do you counter these? So what I need you to do instead is hard focus on that first application. Get that sample in. It is so easy to get drawn down the garden path of going into something completely different. But what I really want you to focus on is that first app and getting that demo ready. In order to not slow down and lose momentum, you have to keep high velocity. You have to keep focus. It can be very hard to do when you have competing priorities, but the more you prioritize this, the easier it is to actually complete it and get it done in a reasonable amount of time. And finally, in terms of don't go too fast and overestimate your maturity, what I want you to do instead is listen to us and wait for us to tell you you're ready to do your demo. We've done this 1,000 times. We know what it looks like to be successful. And we know when you're ready and confident to be able to deliver a demo that makes a huge impact and gets people excited. How will we actually architect your MVP? Now, this is where things get really quite interesting. We use, generally speaking, reference architectures. This is just an AWS example, but there are all sorts of other examples out there. The components in this tend to be fairly interchangeable, but at the end of the day, what's really important is looking at the tools you use and the tools you want to be able to use inside of your platform and make sure that they're part of this setup. We have a lot of interesting resource packs available that allow you to connect what you use in fairly quickly. When we look at the reference architecture as a whole, you will see the developer control plane is called the front end and the integration and delivery plane is called the back end. These are sort of the key things we need to think about in terms of designing the golden paths. On the Humanitec portal side, this is also something that can be achieved with things like Backstage. However, inside the MVP, I highly recommend you just stick with the Humanitec portal. What you're going to do is make sure that your platform source code lives in its own repository. So this is where you're going to create things called resource definitions, which we will look at in later videos inside of the MVP series. On the application source code side, you're going to introduce something called SCORE. This is our workload specification. It is an open source CNCF project, and it is a really cool way for developers to never have to leave their IDE in order to make resource requests. You're also going to see inside of the backend on the integration and delivery plane, which is your traditional CI/CD pipeline, the platform orchestrator sitting at the center. This is the thing that makes magic happen inside of IDPs, and this is Humanitec's big product. What we're going to do in later videos is look in detail at what that actually does and how it makes things work in a very, very cool way. The other components, the resource plane, monitoring, logging, and security, are something I want you to discuss with your architect in terms of what makes sense to bring in inside of the scope of an MVP. We can get a lot of things done, but we want to make sure that we are achieving a baseline that makes sense for your org. So now I want to show you a couple things, some resources and further learning that will be quite valuable for you. What I want you to start with is the learning sessions. These are incredibly important. These cover the critical phases of the MVP, from development through execution and that orchestration layer. This is going to give you a really key idea of how you need to think about an IDP and how you need to think about it in the Humanitec context. We also have documentation and tutorials. So they're very detailed. They go across all of the key concepts. And there's also a really cool AI tool you can use to ask questions. And I'll show you that in just a second. There's also targeted demos. So we have designed these for platform engineers as well as developers to give you further context and understanding as to what's actually going on. You'll find recordings of these inside of this MVP track. And then finally, hands-on help. Work with your Humanitec platform architect as well as your CSM to deep dive advanced integrations and features, to deep dive the concepts around change management inside of platform engineering, and to really give yourself the best start for success. Let's take a quick look at the developer documentation. So it's called developer documentation, but it also covers platform engineers too. We just wanted to make sure that the concept of it really made sure we understood that it was hands-on, that it's a deep dive, and that it goes through all the important concepts. So URL is developer.humanitec.com. And on the screen, you'll see there's quite a lot already. What I want to highlight is the Ask AI. And this is a really cool tool where I can ask a contextual question. Most humans think in how do I do X with Y? And our AI tool is there to help you understand those questions that you might have. You can also see some examples that other people have asked or that have been commonly asked. There is also a search tool that is quite powerful and goes through not just our documentation, but our training, our examples, as well as blog posts and other front-facing things that we have published. It's a really cool tool to have. The Humanitec developer documentation is also very useful for looking at tutorials. There's also some very cool examples that you can look at if you click up here. And I encourage you to check out the example library because there's a lot of interesting stuff in here to get you started quickly. This includes things like the resource packs, the resource definitions, the resource graph patterns, as well as information about SCORE itself and examples and Humanitec pipelines. So that is it for looking at the MVP concept as a whole. If you have any questions, please let us know. You can reach us at info@humanitec.com or reach our technical support team directly at support@humanitec.com. Your customer success manager is also there as a resource for you, as is your architect. We hope you enjoy the MVP journey and check out the other videos in the series for more information, more tools, and more important concepts that you will learn along this path. Good luck and thanks again.